Hey y'all, Matt here, and today we got another Bible study video. And today we're in Magic Kingdom, sitting in front of the castle, and I thought, what better chance than to discuss the Messianic King. Where did this Messianic King figure start in the Bible, and why was this king figure so prominent in the Jewish history? Why were they looking for Jesus? But before we get into this topic, I just want to take a second to remind you, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends so we'll reach more people. Text me or email me if you have any more topics you'd like to see in these videos. But the beginning of the Messianic King, when Abraham was first called to be a nation, God called Abraham, told him to leave his land, and he promised him that he was going to make him a nation, that he was going to bless him, and that he was going to give him land. And this was the beginnings of the nation of Israel. And as we know, most nations have a king, but Israel was unique. Israel did not have a king. For a long period in their history, a judge figure actually ruled. We see these judges, people like Moses in Exodus, Joshua in the book of Joshua, and we see a bunch of these judge figures in the book of Judges. These weren't kings, but they were leaders of the individual tribes. They were military and spiritual leaders, and they also handled like legal disagreements and stuff like that. But ultimately, the title king was set apart for God and God alone. God was the king, and these judges were the ones that answered to God. They sought out God's wisdom and direction, just as they would seek out a normal earthly king's wisdom and direction. But once we get to 1 Samuel in the Bible, we see this changes. The people, they see the nations around them, they see how they have kings, and they're not satisfied with God as their king anymore. They think if they have a king, they'll be more successful, that it's going to change things. And so they demand a king from Samuel, who is the judge at this time. He's a prophet. And what does God do? Like we discussed previously, sometimes when we do stuff that's sinful, and it's something that we're determined to do, God will actually give us over to that sin. And because of their rebellion, because they demanded a king, in 1 Samuel 8, God gives them what they want, and he gives them a king. And he very quickly anoints Saul as the king over the kingdom. Saul was the person that you would think would be a great king. He's tall, handsome, and everybody thought he'd be a great king, but he wasn't. In 1 Samuel 16, we see Saul rebels against God, and he actually goes and he becomes arrogant. He sacrifices which only Samuel the prophet should be doing. He's basically taking his wisdom into his own hands and disobeying God. And so God basically rejects Saul and puts David in his place. And David is a better king. He's God's choice. He's humble. He pursues the Lord for guidance, but he's still a sinner. This is very clear in 2 Samuel 11 when he sins with Bathsheba, when he sleeps with a married woman and has a kid. But when confronted with the sin, what made David different was that David repented of these sins and that he turned back to the God. And so what we see here is Israel needs a king figure, and that king figure is God. It's always been God. But because of their demand of a king, God put this king in their place. And because David was the most well-done earthly example, even though he's still a sinner, that is where this Messiah figure came from. In 2 Samuel 7, God actually promises David that he's going to make this Messiah figure, this king that is going to sit on the throne eternally, that's never going to fall, who's often described as the son of David. Sorry, we had to take a break for a second there as a cavalcade went by. It got really loud. But so we see David as a pretty good earthly leader, but as a human, he's still flawed in his sin. And so the only solution to this is the one that God provides. And in 2 Samuel 7, God solves this problem by making a promise to David that he's going to send a king out of his bloodline that is not only going to be eternal, but that's going to be perfect. He's going to be the sinless God, the sinless king that Israel needed to lead them righteously, without mistakes, without error, without sin. And this king is going to be in harmony with God. There's not going to be any kind of disturbances there, no falling away, no selfish ambitions, anything like that. And because this promise was made, this covenant was made with David, this figure, or this Messiah figure, is often described as the son of David, because he is the perfect king, but he comes from the son of David's line. He's got all the good qualities of David, but without the sin. This king's described throughout the prophets and was long awaited by Israel to come and redeem the people, especially once they get to this place in history where they fall into sin. Solomon, they go through a bunch of poor leaders, they split into two kingdoms, and eventually they're going to fall, and they're going to get sent into exile in the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, eventually the Medes and the Persian Empire, and then they're going to fall and rule under the Roman Empire when Jesus comes around. But this is why, this oppression from these foreign nations is why this Messiah figure would be really somebody that they're looking forward to, that around the time of Jesus they're expecting of, because they're living under the oppression of their neighbors. They are not a nation anymore. They don't have their own land. They have to follow the rules of their oppressors. And because of this Messiah figure is, they believe, going to come and basically lead a revolt and restore the people. We know, however, that this Messiah figure was going to come, and he was going to be the suffering servant that we see in Isaiah 53. He was going to come, he was going to be God in human form. He was going to raise up his disciples. He was going to go to the cross willingly, die a horrendous death that is only fit for a sinner, even though he's perfect, and he's going to die for our sins. And instead of leading this military revolt and physically redeeming the people at that time, he's going to physically redeem us after death, when we are raised from the dead and we go to the judgment seat, because all of our sin is going to be washed away by this son of David, by this Messiah figure. And that's why it would be important. That is who the perfect king is, and that is the king that we await, both Jews and Christians, to come, because he is our only redeemer, and he is our salvation. He's the source of our salvation. But I hope this video is beneficial. I hope it was a blessing to you. If there's any other topics you'd like to see, please email me, text me. If you need a study Bible, I've got study Bibles to give out. If you're local to me, send me an email, text message. I'll make sure you get a Bible. But until the next video, I love you guys. Blessings.